To quote the great philosopher Judge Dredd, I am the law. Welcome, Mere Mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. I am your host, Kyron here. And as you might surmise, this is the podcast where I enforce my ideas upon the general population. And you foolish peasants. No, that's not what is this podcast about. This is a podcast where I do live book reviews, and I do indeed have a live book review for you here today. It is The Law by Frédéric Bastiat, and I have the Portuguese version here, which says A Lei, and the subtitle of this is Why the Left Does Not Work, the Basis of Liberal Thought. So this book was first published in 1850. It's about 135 pages. Took me probably about 7 or 8 hours reading to get through this, but this was because it was written in Portuguese, so I was having to translate from my natural first language of English. It is a philosophical treatise that I guess might get you confused as political writing, just due to the subtitle. I would say don't focus on the subtitle and actually think of it. I'd say it's more a philosophical book rather than political. And so in it, Bastiat argues that the law should be limited to a narrow subset of protection of natural rights, and its function is not to be philanthropic. It's not to help the people. It's not to distribute wealth equally. It's not to do anything that he was noticing was becoming a much more common occurrence or common thought during his time, which was socialism in particular. And this is why he really focuses on why the left doesn't work, because this was in the era of ideas from Marx coming through. The French Revolution had just happened, so he saw a lot of the negative things that were happening from that, and how the law was being abused in a lot of cases and interfering in people's lives. So how the book is actually set out, it's just got these mini sections all throughout where it's just a title of, just something random. So this one is the corruption, the complete corruption of the law. And then he'll have about 1 or 2 pages going through of his notes. This one also has additional notes from the person who translated this book, who also did the introduction and commentaries, and his name is Eduardo Levi. So throughout it, he makes arguments to why he thinks that the law should be very limited in its application, and he includes a lot of quotes from people who argue, I guess, the opposite, and say the law should be able to do this, the law should be able to do that. And a lot of these are people from the French Revolution, so famous people like Robespierre, as well as other French notables, philosophical thinkers, people like this. It goes on and on and on. So we get into this next section here, which is the themes. And so we really see, he starts with, I guess, life, liberty, and property, which was the actual title of this book review. And this is his base for what the law should actually do. And so he starts with how we actually got these, which was a God-given right. So that's just brushed over by him at the start, and that these natural rights, so life, liberty, and property, the law should only be used to defend these, and it should not violate them in search of external justice or something like this. And there's some kind of abstract concepts in this book. One of these being negative rights. And so, for example, in his thinking, the law doesn't enforce justice. It prevents and impedes injustice, and there actually is no thing as justice in itself. It's not a concept. You only have the negative side. So if you've got the full spectrum and 0 is neutrality, everything above neutrality is in the positive is justice, but this doesn't really exist, and there's only bad things of injustice. And so he's got all sorts of quotes of life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. And he's got lots of quotes like that, which occur throughout this book. And so he further refines some other terms in this, such as exploitation. So what is exploitation? When a portion of wealth is transferred without consent and without compensation, by force or by fraud, from the person that is the owner of it to someone that is not the owner of it. I say there was a violation of property and therefore the act of exploitation was committed. So he's got a lot of strong arguments in this book against socialism and people who want to plan and mold human beings, which is what you see with a lot of the socialists and their writings. And so he's got plenty of examples from Robespierre, who I mentioned earlier, who was one of the key figures of the French Revolution, and others who talk a big game about virtue and morals, but their substantiation of this into laws and into human society usually ends up in a lot of murder, a lot of death, a lot of poverty, and a lot of suffering for human and subjugation and removal of property and life and liberty from a lot of people. So what I would say is he doesn't make this explicit, but he kind of believes in the goodness of mankind. I think that's the underlying thesis that you see a lot running throughout this book. And certainly in the ability for humans to and individuals to make their own choices and decide, this is what I want to do with my life, these are the actions I want to take, and that it is foolish for governments and people and laws to interfere with these decisions that people are making, on whether it be on the minutiae of what they want to eat for today, to the large scale, this is I want to vote on this particular aspect, or even things such as I'm very sick and I want to end my own life. He argues against the government's ability to interfere with any of these things. So he contrasts this with the left, the socialism, and says, these people argue, and then he has a bunch of quotes, how they say, human beings make terrible decisions, how they hurt themselves, and this is why we need laws and legislation to, for the fraternity of mankind. And they use a lot of flowery words of, justice, of brotherhood between men, of the, what's the word? The sovereignty of individuals to. Actually, no, that's the opposite. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head. I probably should have wrote these down. In any case, they say all of these things. We can make everyone happy. We can please everyone in these utopic ideas, and he fights against this idea that humanity is stupid and can't reach these things themselves. So therefore, we need an infallible leader or someone or law to who can help do this, who has the best ideas, who knows, all right, if we just plan this out, we can make everything good for everyone. And then enforcing of these great ideas from people who know better. And as the interesting thing is, he wrote all of this before the big calamities that we saw in the 20th century, of places such as Soviet Russia, of Mao's China, of Cambodia. And I'm just listing off a bunch of places which really experimented with socialism, and it went really, really wrong. And he focuses on the left side of the scale in this, which is more these people who are having these utopic ideas and under what would be known as the guise of communism, if you want to apply a broad scale term to it. But I'm sure he would have railed against the exact same things if fascism had been more dominant during his time. Remember, he wrote this it was published in 1850. He died in 1850, so he probably wrote this in the 1840s. And I'm sure he would have said against the exact same things against any of the governments who were totalitarian, but with a dictator on what you would call the right side of scale, who were using laws for their own benefits and for their own ideas, and for which ended up resulting in basically the same thing, of the subjugation of people, of their loss of life, of their liberty, and of their property. So it's interesting applying his thoughts and ideas into a modern day context, because the law is rather tricky in our sense, because the word has been distorted from what I imagine his time. So in his time, 1840s, a lot less government, a lot less people on earth, and in particular countries, a lot less laws. And so when he uses the law, he uses this for, I guess, every rule that is created by government. Whereas when we think of it, we kind of think of, okay, the law would be maybe related to like the criminal justice system or something like that. But no, it extends a lot further from that, because we have laws in relation to criminal actions, but also white collar crime, of building regulations, of airplane manufacturing, of environmental pollution, trade tariffs. There's, I'm sure just in the construction of this bedroom here, there is 50 different laws related to the lighting, to the windows, to the square footage compared to the height, and all these sorts of like lots and lots and lots of things related to this. And this is where he would go, okay, were these laws, choose an individual law. Does this help impede the violations of life, liberty, and property? And I'll give an example of that in a second. He would say no, and so I imagine he'd be rather horrified at just how much laws we have nowadays, and that it has grossly gone over its limits. And he had a quote of something like, justice has limits, but philanthropy is limitless, and that it can grow endlessly. And when he said philanthropy, he meant the idea that, we need this in place to help protect everyone. And so we need, or to redistribute wealth, or to, make the world a better place, or whatever it is. So his individual things that he would probably saying would be, the clear-cut stuff. There was a drunken murderer who, sliced open his wife for revenge because she cheated on him. Okay, that's an impediment of life. There should be a law related to someone who murders someone. The imprisonment of a child, and beyond, the natural caregiving of parents. So if you're grounding a child, maybe that's okay. If you're imprisoning them in a basement so they can never go to school, and they have no liberty at all, okay, that's an impediment of liberty. We need a law related to that. And maybe something related to property, such as someone has defrauded an old lady from her money, or held up someone at knife point to get their purse. Okay, that's an impediment of property. Someone has stolen property, and so there should be a law related to that. So it's very tricky, because even just then I mentioned, all these out cases. A child who is a parent grounding a child and saying you're not allowed to leave the house. Okay, well, that's an impediment of liberty, but we all understand, okay, children need to be treated differently, because they don't have fully functioning brains. They can't make the same decisions. Their reasoning is questionable at best. And there's a lot of gray areas that I don't think he really got into, and I think that's because he didn't give enough examples. So I'll talk more about that in a second. Let's jump onto the author himself, Frédéric Bastiat. As it was born in France in 1801, he had a very wealthy family, from what I could gather just from my little research, but a hard life. His mother died relatively early on. I think he was the age of 7. His father passed away in his early years as well, so he was raised by, I believe, an uncle or a grandparent. And nevertheless, he had a fair bit of family wealth, and once his remaining family members had died, he then was able to study what he wanted, and he had a very, a thinking mind, a philosophical mind. And so he went and studied, ended up becoming a politician, and I guess an economist in a certain sense. And he was in the trenches, so to speak. He lived through many of the things that he was writing about and talking about, and The Law is his most well-known book, but he also had some interesting other things, satire related to the candlestick makers who petitioned the government to block out the sun because it was ruining their business, and they needed laws to prevent this. So you can see he thought about a lot of these concepts. As I mentioned, I have the Portuguese translation here, so my understanding of this book was probably, 92%, I would say. My Portuguese is getting okay, and this is a rather simple book in terms of its language. And it also had additional details in reference to Brazilian politics. So it added some concepts of, okay, this is what he was talking about in 1850. This is how it has been applied in a Brazilian context in the mid 2000s, and we can see why he was talking about these bad things. So it was a product of Bastiat's time that he was focusing so heavily on the left side. I mentioned this before, on socialism. And I think that this is why I say it's more a philosophical book rather than political. I think it's just incidental that he was talking, why the left doesn't function. If you read that nowadays, if you're on the left side of the spectrum, you'd maybe go like, oh, this guy's just railing against my political party. I'm going to throw this book out. Whereas I don't think that is the best way to look at it. And in fact, if I would just get rid of the subtitle personally and just say, it's the law, the basis of liberal thought, and leave it at that. So the structure in this book can seem loose at times, but he'll usually hone back on his central point whenever he wanders too far, such as the quote previously where I was talking about exploitation. He goes down some areas where it's like, okay, I'm not sure how this is related to his core thesis of the law should only be used to prevent of people being exploited for their life or their liberty or their property. But you'll see he drags it back eventually, and it's pretty clear thinking throughout. And what I liked about it was that he makes some rather fundamental judgments, or his arguments are from a really fundamental level. He keeps coming back to this: it's life and it's liberty and property, and nothing else should be used to for the law to add in additional things. And he actually carries the reframe in certain areas. So someone was saying we must declare war on socialism, and he goes, no, we mustn't do that. We must declare war on exploitation, and that's why he starts talking about exploitation and coercion and people exploiting others for their life, their liberty, and their property. I still think he doesn't go far enough to really reduce his semantically unclear words, because he uses this word socialism a lot. And this is the problem with words. They change over time. They lose their meaning. If he had to define the word law, I think it would be very different from how someone would define it nowadays, or what is in our versions of the dictionary. And this is just the problem with languages. And I notice it just in this book. It's in Portuguese, so it's got a little bit of a different flavor than I imagine the French does, as I imagine the English translation would as well. And he was writing originally in French. So, who is we? Why are we declaring, a war on something? What is war? There's a lot of words in this book which he does a good job of trying to make it relatively fundamental of clear, but if you examine it with a critical eye, you can also go like, okay, where did he get this part from? Why is this his fundamental judgment? But overall, it's pretty good. So I'll jump into my summary now. A book like this is good at directing you on I think, on the right path. There's always going to be loopholes. There's always going to be questions raised of, okay, why life, liberty, and property? Why these three? And he argues that God gave it to us, and it's like, okay, well, what's God? and so that would take you down a whole nother rabbit hole. How did he give us property? Why should individual liberty be paramount? Applying this to children and the mentally disabled, are there distinctions? You can see, you could argue against this book a lot. I think it's good to just come into it with a kind of like a blank slate and be like, okay, where do we start off? Imagine I'm an alien here and come into Earth. What's some good aspects to focus on? Should we have people deciding what other people can do, who believe they know better and enacting laws upon them and things like this? Or should we have it relatively, a free market, I guess, if you want to call it like that, where people can just do whatever they want, they can make their own decisions, and as long as they're not impeding other people's life, their liberty, and their property, then everything is fine. So you have to just see if his principles make sense for you. They did for me, and this was a kind of a refreshing read, to be honest. My only qualm with the books is that he didn't have enough examples when he was really using this. He had a lot of quotes from people. It's kind of like the philosophical this is what these people believe when they say, we need to enact these laws for philanthropy, for social justice, for economic justice, for justice itself, to make everyone happy, to give everyone an equal access to this or to that. And he talks about their philosophical basis, and you can kind of see, okay, these people just think they're better than everyone else, and this is why they want to go to the top. And they're actually probably more looking just for power's sake, rather than because they actually care. But let's grant them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, these people actually do care. They do want to make the world a better place. What happens when they get into power? Well, this is why a fault of the book, but not the fault of the author, is that he didn't have examples. He couldn't point to, the the Russian Revolution or the Chinese Revolution or any of these other revolutions that happened where people who had these utopic ideas get into power, and what do they end up doing? They end up creating a lot of laws that hurt and kill and make a lot of people suffer. So that's the only kind of like bad thing about this book. He didn't have those examples ready hand, other than he could have maybe taken some from the French Revolution and said, like, okay, these people are coming into power, what do? Oh, they murdered 40,000 people or something like this. So nevertheless, I think there's a good book that makes you ponder, ask more questions, makes you dig a little bit deeper, and gives you a little bit of a fundamental basis of where to think from and how you should think about things, or not how you should, but how you could think about things. So I came from this agreeing that the law should be used sparingly. So overall, The Law by Frédéric Bastiat, I'm giving a 7.5 out of 10. Pretty good book, and relatively quick and easy to get through as well. So there's no real other books that I've read in this vein, because it is short, because it is, I suppose, philosophical, yet kind of looks political. So I tend to stay away from a lot of political books, but this was one that just kept popping up. So I was like, all right, I'll give this a shot. I do really recommend checking out the next book review that I do, just because I've talked about semantics and being careful with your words. And this next book is really going to get into that, which is The Tyranny of Words by Stuart Chase, which is looking at how people talk about things, and when they use words, we can see, okay, a lot of things get distorted and a lot of communication is not super helpful. I used quite a few words in this which had these abstractions, and Frédéric Bastiat did as well. Abstractions are nice when you're using them in a very specific context, in a very specific way, and you're conscious of it. When you're not conscious of it and you just say, communism is bad or socialism is bad, without including examples, reference to exactly what you're talking about, because socialism can mean a whole lot of things for a whole lot of people, it's a minefield, and you got to be careful of it. So the next book review, definitely recommend checking that out in a week's time at this time. So let's jump on to my kind of last two sections here, the value for value. This is a value for value show. I do this ad-free, sponsorship-free. No one's telling me which books to read, why I should read this, or paying me to read these books. I choose them of my own free will. And it's very nice to receive some value back in return for doing these book reviews. And I hope you get some things from this. So you can do this through time, talent, and treasure. Time, share this with someone who you think would really benefit from this book review, who would greatly to hear about this, a summary of this book. Talent, if there's things you'd like me to know, if you have a book recommendation that you think I would enjoy from this, if there's other philosophical books that are parading perhaps as political books, I would love to know about these ones as well. And yeah, just reaching out via the comments and doing that. And then finally, if you want to help support the show, there's two different ways you can do this. The quick and easy one is we've got a PayPal link down below, so you can send some money into that as a thank you for creating this. I'd love to hear a message from you as well, and that helps to pay for the costs of hosting this podcast, and paying for equipment and things like that. And also, it's just it's a nice feeling to know that someone has gotten some value from this podcast. So whatever amount you want to choose to send in, I very much appreciate that. If you are more technically inclined, I am also doing this live on the podcast apps. And in these podcast apps, and some of them, you can actually send in a boostergram, which is a message with some money attached, or it's support with a message attached. I should probably put it that way. And if you go onto mereMortalspodcast.com/support, I've got a list of them. I've got how you can do this. It's just a nice, cool way of being able to do this. So I very much do appreciate that when people send that in. The final little reminder here is that I am live, usually 10 a.m. on a Thursday. I'll be doing that for next week, and then the week after I am traveling back to Brazil. So we might have a gap there, or Juan might do a book review for that one. I'm not too sure at this exact moment what we'll be doing there. But I do want to try and keep doing these, but when I am traveling in Brazil, it's a little bit harder to keep these book reviews up. And I have been reading a lot less whilst traveling, because I'm enjoying my time and enjoying my life, my liberty, and my property. So we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. For Bruno Duarte, he said, very cool live. It's late in my country. I have to sleep. Nice job. Hey, thanks, mate. I do appreciate that. So if you do see the little live notification pop up, come and join. I really do appreciate this sort of interactions. And until the next week, ciao for now. Kyron out.